I spent years buying my mom a house. She said my brother did more, so I sold it without warning. Hi everyone, I'm a 32-year-old guy, and this happened about a year ago. Even now, I still get messages from relatives about it. Some people say I went too far. Some say I finally did what needed to be done. Honestly, I don't regret it. Not even a little. I grew up in a pretty normal middle-class family. Nothing special, nothing dramatic at first. But things changed when my dad passed away when I was 17. After that, my mom changed too. Not in the way people usually expect. She didn't become fragile or overly emotional. Instead, she became very selective. Selective about who she supported. Selective about who she believed in. And most importantly, selective about which child mattered more. That child was my younger brother, Rohan. Now I don't hate him. I really don't. He didn't ask to be the favorite. But he definitely learned how to benefit from it. Growing up, he was always the talented one, and the one with potential. I was just the one who was expected to do better. If I scored 85%, my mom would ask why it wasn't 90. If he scored 70, she would say he had potential and just needed time. If I worked hard, it was expected. If he did the bare minimum, it was praised. At first, I didn't question it. I thought maybe this is just how families are. Someone is always better, someone is always behind. But the gap kept growing. When I got a part-time job in college, my mom told me I was wasting time and should focus on studies. When my brother failed his semester, she said he was just going through a phase. That phase lasted years. I graduated, got a job, and slowly started supporting the household. Bills, groceries, repairs, anything unexpected, it was always me. My brother, on the other hand, was still figuring things out. By the time I was 27, I finally got a decent promotion. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to feel some stability for the first time. That's when my mom started talking about buying a house. Not for me, for the family, but the way she said it made it very clear what she meant. She would say things like Rohan needs stability, Rohan needs a good environment, Rohan can't grow without support. She never once said that I deserved anything. Still, I didn't argue. At that point in my life, I had convinced myself of something that, looking back, was pretty dangerous. I thought if I just did enough, she would finally see me. So I worked harder. I saved aggressively. I cut down on everything. No vacations, no unnecessary spending, no lifestyle upgrades. 3 years went by like that. And eventually, I bought a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, but in a good and safe area. It was the biggest purchase of my life. And I put it in my mom's name. Even now, I know that was my biggest mistake. When I handed her the keys, she hugged me. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I thought maybe this is it. Maybe now she's proud of me. But then she said something that stayed with me. She said this will really help Rohan settle down. Not thank you. Not I'm proud of you. Just that. I ignored it. I told myself it didn't matter. A few months later, I went to visit them. Like always, I brought groceries, paid a couple of bills, and fixed small things around the house. My brother was sitting on the couch, scrolling on his phone like usual. No job, no direction, just passing time. At some point, my mom and I got into a small argument. I don't even remember what it started over. It was probably something minor. It always is. But then it escalated. And then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Your brother has done more for this family than you ever could." For a second, I thought she was joking. I actually laughed. But she wasn't joking. I asked her if she was serious. And she said, yes. She said at least he has a heart, and that I only do things to show off. That moment changed something inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was clarity. A very quiet, very cold kind of clarity. I realized something I should have understood years ago. It didn't matter what I did. Not then, not now, not ever. I could give everything I had, and it still wouldn't be enough. So I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to explain. I just said okay, and I left. That was the last day I ever tried to earn her approval. And that was the day I started planning something that would change everything. I didn't go back to that house for a while after that day. Not out of anger, just because I finally understood my place in that family, and I didn't feel the need to prove anything anymore. For the first time in years, I stopped calling first. I stopped checking if they needed anything. I stopped sending extra money. And the silence that followed was interesting. No one called to ask if I was okay. No one wondered why I had suddenly disappeared. But after about 2 weeks, my mom called. Not to talk, not to apologize, just to ask if I had paid the electricity bill. That was the moment I knew nothing had changed on their side. Only I had changed. I said no. She sounded annoyed. She said the bill was overdue and asked why I hadn't taken care of it. I told her she could ask Rohan to do it. There was a pause. Then she said he was busy. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just said I was busy too, and I hung up. That was the first time I had ever said no without explaining myself. And strangely, it felt good. Not powerful, just peaceful. Over the next few weeks, the calls increased. But the pattern stayed the same. Every call had a purpose. A bill, a repair, groceries, something needed, something expected. Never once did she ask how I was doing. Never once did she say she missed me. And I noticed something else too. Every time I didn't respond immediately, the tone changed. From casual, to irritated, to passive-aggressive. At one point, she even said, "You've changed." And for once, I agreed with her. I had, because I had finally stopped being useful. That's when the idea first came to me. Not out of revenge. At least, that's what I told myself. It came from a simple question. If I stopped doing everything, what would happen? Would Rohan step up? Would my mom finally see the reality? Or would everything just fall apart? At first, it was just a thought. But the more I sat with it, the more it made sense. That house, the one I worked 3 years for, the one I was still quietly maintaining, it wasn't really mine anymore. But legally, it was. Even though it was in my mom's name, I had financed everything. I had the transaction history, the loan structure, the documentation trail. And more importantly, I had access. I started looking into it. Not in a rushed or emotional way. Calmly, carefully. I spoke to a lawyer. Not giving full details at first, just asking general questions. Then slowly explaining the situation. He told me something very simple. If all financial responsibility, proof of payment, and loan linkage came from me, there were ways to transfer ownership or sell, especially if the current owner agreed or if things were structured correctly. It wouldn't be instant, but it was possible. That's when the thought became a plan. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not extended family, no one, because I knew exactly what would happen if word got out. I would be the villain before I even did anything. So I stayed quiet, and I started preparing. The first thing I did was completely stop financial support. No more bills, no more groceries, nothing. If something broke, it stayed broken. If something needed to be paid, it stayed unpaid. At first, I expected chaos. But instead, something surprising happened. They managed, not comfortably, but they managed, which told me something important. They didn't need me, they were just used to having me. And that made what I was about to do feel justified. About 2 months later, my mom called again. This time, her tone was different. Less demanding, more cautious. She asked if I could come over and talk. I said I was busy. She insisted. She said it was important. I went. When I walked into the house, things looked different. Not terrible, but not as maintained as before. The small things I used to take care of were clearly being ignored. My brother was still on the couch. Same position, same routine. That part hadn't changed at all. We sat down, and my mom started talking. She said expenses were getting difficult. She said managing everything was stressful. She said I should understand my responsibilities. I listened quietly, and then I asked her something very simple. I asked what exactly Rohan was contributing. She immediately got defensive. She said he was trying. She said I shouldn't compare. She said I should support my family without questioning. That's when I knew nothing had changed. Not even a little. So I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said I would think about it. And then I left. That same night, I made the decision. I wasn't going to argue anymore. I wasn't going to explain anymore. I wasn't going to prove anything anymore. I was just going to act. Over the next few weeks, I started the process. Paperwork, consultations, quiet steps that no one noticed. I found a buyer, a serious one, someone ready to move quickly. The price was fair, not a huge profit, but enough to close the chapter. Everything was lined up. All that was left was execution. And the part that made it real. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't tell my brother. I didn't give a warning. Because for years, every decision about me had been made without considering me. This time, I did the same. The day everything was finalized, I got the confirmation call. The house was sold, legally, completely, done. I sat there for a long time after that call. Not celebrating, not feeling guilty, just quiet, because I knew what was coming next. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of it. That evening, my mom called. Her voice was normal. She had no idea. She asked if I could come by the next day. I said yes, and as I hung up the phone, I realized something. Tomorrow, everything was going to change. Not just for them, but for me too, and there was no going back after that. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was nervous, but because my mind was finally quiet. For years, I had this constant pressure in the back of my head. What to do next, what to fix, what they needed, what I hadn't done yet. That night, for the first time, there was nothing left to plan. Everything was already done. The next morning, I got ready like it was any normal day. No rush, no hesitation. I reached the house around noon. The same house I had worked 3 years for. The same house that never really felt like mine. When I walked in, my mom was in the kitchen. My brother was on the couch, of course, exactly where I expected him to be. Some things really never change. She asked me to sit down. Her tone was calm, but I could tell she had something on her mind. She started talking about expenses again. About how things were getting difficult. About how I needed to step up. I let her speak. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just listened. And when she finished, I said something that sounded simple, but carried everything behind it. I said, "You won't have to worry about this house anymore." She looked confused. She asked what I meant. I told her the house had been sold. For a second, she didn't react. Like her brain needed time to process what I had just said. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny. Because she thought it was impossible. She said, "Stop joking." I didn't smile. I didn't repeat myself. I just said, "I'm serious." That's when the silence hit. Heavy, uncomfortable, real. She stood up. Her voice changed instantly. She asked me what I meant by sold. She asked how I could sell it. She said the house was in her name. I nodded, and I calmly explained that everything had been handled legally. That the payments, the documentation, the process, all of it had been taken care of. That the sale was final. That the new owners would be taking possession soon. My brother finally looked up from his phone. For the first time, he was actually paying attention. My mom's voice started rising. She said I had no right. She said I betrayed her. She said I destroyed the family. And I just sat there. Because I had heard all of this before. Different words, same meaning. Then she said something that almost made me laugh again. She said, "Where are we supposed to go now?" That's when I looked straight at my brother. And I said the line that had been sitting in my head for weeks. "Let's see what he can do." The room went completely silent. My brother looked shocked. My mom looked like she didn't even understand what was happening anymore. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one trying to fix it. She started crying, loud, emotional, the kind of crying that pulls attention. She said I had ruined everything. She said I was selfish. She said I was punishing her. But I didn't react, because this wasn't punishment. This was just reality. A reality where I wasn't the safety net anymore. Within an hour, the calls started. Relatives, one after another, some angry, some pretending to be calm, all saying the same thing in different ways. "How could you do this? She's your mother. Family doesn't work like this." I listened to a few. Then I stopped answering, because none of them had been there when I was paying for everything. None of them had been there when I was being told I would never be enough. They only showed up when things broke. By evening, things escalated. My mom called me again, crying, saying the buyers had contacted her. That it was real, that they had to leave. I told her I had already informed her that morning. She asked me where she was supposed to go. And again, I gave the same answer. "Ask Rohan." She said he couldn't handle it. And I said, "That's exactly the point." There was a long pause. Then she said something different. For the first time in years, her voice sounded unsure. She said, "Why are you doing this?" Not angry, not accusing, just confused. And I finally answered honestly. I told her I wasn't doing anything to her. I was just stepping back. I told her for years, I had been carrying everything while being told I was worth nothing. I told her she made her choice very clear. And now, I was making mine. She didn't respond. She just kept crying softly. And then the call ended. The next few days were chaos. Relatives kept calling. Some tried to guilt me. Some tried to threaten me with family reputation. Some even said I should reverse the sale. Like it was something I could just undo. I didn't. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was just standing still. And letting everything play out. A week later, I got a message from my brother. His first message to me in months. He asked if we could talk. I didn't reply immediately. Not out of ego. Just because I didn't feel the urgency anymore. Eventually, I said yes. Because I was curious. Not about what he would say. But about who he would be, now that things were real. I met my brother 2 days later. Not at the house. Not anywhere near it. He asked me to meet at a small cafe across town. I think even he knew things couldn't go back to how they were. When I walked in, he was already there. For the first time in years, he didn't look relaxed. No phone in his hand. No lazy posture. He looked tense, like someone who had just been dropped into a reality he wasn't prepared for. I sat down across from him. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then he spoke. He asked me why I did it. Not angrily, not accusing, just confused. And honestly, that question felt very familiar. Everyone had been asking it. But no one had really wanted the real answer. So I gave him one. I told him I didn't do anything suddenly. I told him this was years in the making. Years of being the one who handled everything. Years of being told it still wasn't enough. Years of watching him do nothing. and still be treated like he was everything. He looked down while I was speaking. Didn't interrupt. Didn't defend himself. That surprised me. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "I didn't know it was this bad." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Of course he didn't know. He never had to. I told him that's exactly the problem. He never had to know. He never had to think about bills, or responsibilities, or consequences, because someone else was always there to handle it. He asked me what we were supposed to do now, and I noticed something important. He said, "We, not I, not me, still, we." I leaned back and looked at him for a second. Then I said something very simple. "I don't know. That's your job now." He didn't like that. I could see it immediately. Not because it was unfair, but because it was new. He asked me if I could at least help for a few months. Just until things stabilized. That's when I shook my head. Not aggressively, just firmly. I told him I had already helped. For years. More than enough. And this wasn't about abandoning them. This was about stepping out of a role I was never supposed to carry alone. He got quiet again. Then he said something softer. He said, "Mom is not doing well." I didn't respond immediately, because I knew exactly what that meant. Not physically, emotionally. She wasn't used to this. To uncertainty, to not having control, to not having me as a backup. I asked him what exactly was happening. He said she had been calling relatives nonstop, trying to figure out where to stay, trying to explain the situation in a way that didn't make her look bad. Some relatives offered temporary help. Some avoided the situation completely. And some blamed me. Of course, that part didn't surprise me at all. I asked him what he was doing. And that's when he hesitated. He said he was trying to find a job. Trying. That word again. Trying. I told him trying wasn't going to be enough anymore. Not now. Now it had to be real. Now it had to be consistent. Now it had to actually work. Because there was no safety net left. Not from me. He nodded. But I could tell he was overwhelmed. And for the first time, I actually felt something close to sympathy. Not because of what was happening, but because I knew exactly what he was feeling. The pressure, the responsibility, the uncertainty. I had been living with that for years. He was just experiencing it for the first time. We sat there for a while in silence. Then he asked me one last question. He said, "So that's it. You're just done." I thought about it for a second. Because the honest answer wasn't simple. I wasn't done with them as people. But I was done with the version of myself they had created. The one who gave everything and got nothing back. So I told him the truth. I said, "I'm not done. But things are not going back to how they were." He nodded slowly, like he understood, or at least like he was starting to. Before we left, I told him something important. I told him this was his chance. Not to prove something to me, but to actually become the person everyone had always claimed he was. The capable one, the responsible one, the one with potential. And now, for the first time, he actually had to live up to it. No shortcuts, no backup, no excuses. He didn't respond, but I could see it in his face. It had finally hit him. After that meeting, we went our separate ways. Over the next few weeks, I stayed completely out of it. No calls, no interference, just distance. And slowly, things started to unfold. My mom moved in with a relative temporarily. Not comfortably, not happily, but it was something. My brother managed to get a basic job. Nothing impressive, but it was a start. And for the first time in his life, he had to show up every day. On time, no excuses. I heard all of this through relatives. Because suddenly, everyone wanted to update me. Like I was some kind of observer in a story I used to live in. Some still blamed me. Some quietly admitted that maybe this needed to happen. But the most interesting part was my mom. Because after weeks of silence, she finally called me again. And this time, her tone was completely different. I saw her name on my phone and just stared at it for a few seconds. A month ago, I would have picked up instantly. Now, there was no urgency. Just curiosity. I let it ring once more, then answered. Her voice was quiet, not weak, just different. She didn't start with a complaint. She didn't ask for anything. She just said my name. And for a moment, neither of us said anything after that. Then she asked how I was. That caught me off guard. Not because it was a complicated question, but because I couldn't remember the last time she had asked it without needing something. I said I was fine. Then there was another pause. Longer this time, like she was trying to find the right words and wasn't used to doing that. Finally, she spoke again. She said things had been difficult. She didn't go into dramatic details. Didn't try to make it sound worse than it was. Just said it plainly. Things had been difficult. I listened. She told me she was staying with a relative. That it wasn't permanent. That she felt like a burden. That word stood out, because for years, I had felt exactly that in my own way. She said Rohan had started working. That he left early every morning and came back tired. That he didn't complain, but she could see it was hard for him. Again, I just listened. No interruptions, no reactions. Then her voice changed slightly. Still calm, but heavier. She said, I didn't understand before. I didn't respond immediately, because I wanted to hear the rest. She said she didn't realize how much I had been doing. Not just financially, but everything else. The small things, the constant support, the stability. She said when all of that disappeared, she finally saw what it looked like without it. And it scared her. There was no drama in her voice. No attempt to manipulate. Just honesty, or at least something close to it. Then she said something I had waited years to hear. I was wrong. Simple. Direct. No excuses attached to it. No, but after it. Just that. And strangely, I didn't feel the reaction I thought I would. No relief. No emotional release. Just quiet. Because the truth is, I had stopped needing that validation a long time ago. I thanked her for saying it. And I meant it. But I didn't rush to fix things. I didn't jump in and offer help. I didn't go back to being who I was before. She asked if we could meet. Not to discuss money. Not to solve anything. Just to talk. I told her I would think about it. And I could feel her hesitation on the other end. Like she wasn't used to not getting a clear yes. But she didn't push. She just said okay. And before hanging up, she said something else. She said she was proud of me. I didn't know how to respond to that. Because those words came years too late. But at least they came. After the call ended, I sat there for a while. Thinking. Not about going back, but about what forward even meant now. Because things had changed. Not just for them, but for me too. A few days later, I agreed to meet her. We didn't meet at her relative's place. We met outside, neutral ground. When I saw her, she looked older. Not drastically, but enough to notice. Life had caught up a little. We sat down, and for the first time in years, the conversation felt real. No comparisons, no pressure, no expectations. She talked about how things had been. About adjusting. About realizing how much she had taken for granted. She didn't try to justify her past behavior. And that mattered more than anything she could have said. At one point, she asked me if things could go back to how they were. And that's where I was clear. I told her no, not in a harsh way. Just honestly. I said I wasn't angry anymore. But I wasn't going to return to that role. The one where I carried everything and got nothing back. She nodded, slowly, like she already knew the answer. Then she asked if I would still be part of the family. And I told her yes. But differently. With boundaries. With balance. With respect. Things that didn't exist before. She didn't argue. She didn't resist. She just accepted it. And that was probably the biggest change of all. Before we left, I asked about Rohan. She said he was still working. Still adjusting. Still struggling. But continuing. And for the first time, that actually meant something. Because now it wasn't just words. Now it was real effort. As we stood up to leave, she looked at me and said thank you. Not for money. Not for help. But for everything I had done before. And everything I had forced them to face now. I nodded. And we went our separate ways. Things didn't magically become perfect after that. They never do. But they became honest. And that was enough. I didn't go back to supporting them financially. I didn't take control again. I stayed where I was. Stable, independent, at peace. And slowly, they started building their own version of stability too. Without me holding it up. Looking back now, people still ask me if I went too far. If I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have, but I know one thing for sure. If I hadn't done what I did, nothing would have changed. Not for them, and definitely not for me. And sometimes, the only way to fix something broken is to stop holding it together.